So hello, I am Erin Becker. I'm the Norma Jean Calderwood Director of the Cambridge Art Association. And I thank you for joining us tonight for the remote celebration of our 2021 Members Prize Show. This exhibit is presented in two parts in our Kathryn Schultz Gallery. Part 1 began on February 9th and runs through February 25th. And Part 2 runs from March 2nd through March 18th. As well as online. We do have some online only exhibitors. The 2021 Members Prize Show was juried by Ben Sloat, who is an assistant professor and the director of the MFA in Visual Arts program at Lesley Art and Design in Cambridge, Mass. And I want to thank Ben for joining us tonight. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone to remain muted during the speaker portions of this event. We will hopefully have time for socializing and networking in breakout rooms at the end of the program. I will also note that this is being recorded and will be posted to YouTube once the recording has been processed. We do ask that you use the chat to let us know where you're joining from, and if you're an exhibiting artist or if you're here to support an exhibiting artist. And as we mentioned earlier, you can direct message other attendees by clicking on the blue Everyone button in the chat and scrolling down to select a particular person. I'm joined this evening by CAA's Assistant Director, Rebecca Schnapp. If you do have any troubleshooting questions, please send those directly to Rebecca this evening. And finally, if you have any questions during the artist talks, please use the hand raise function, which you'll see under reactions. If you're on a laptop or a desktop, that's along the bottom toolbar. It's a little smiley face with a plus sign. If you're on a mobile device, I believe, is along the top toolbar. As we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land we are gathered on, both literally and virtually. Tonight, I join you from the traditional lands of the Massachusetts and the Wampanoag. As an organization, the Cambridge Art Association acknowledges the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous peoples still connected to this land on which we gather. With that, thank you again for joining us tonight. I am pleased to share the exhibition tour because I am here celebrating alone. But earlier this week, Rebecca created a tour of the exhibit, and you will see that now. Okay, so thank you, Rebecca, for the video tour. I hope everybody enjoyed that. If you do want to see either exhibit in person, you can make an appointment. Oh, shoot.
Okay, I think something just happened to our internet over at CAA. But in the meantime, I'm going to be putting a link right into the chat box. If anybody's interested in visiting, we are open Tuesday through Friday, noon to 4 p.m. That'll be for both exhibitions. And you can make the appointment right online. And then while we wait for Aaron, we'd love to hear from our juror, Ben Sloat. He's going to say a few words about the jurying process and everything.
Sure. Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, can you hear me?
So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Aaron and Rebecca, for the invitation to be the juror. And thank you for all the folks who submitted, and congratulations for all those who got juried into it. And really my thought for this, and it's really exciting to see it as an exhibition, is severalfold. I can't help but consider our moment right now in the pandemic. And I think that was really a sort of overarching consideration for the shows. And both shows, I think, have their own sort of curatorial thread about them. So I think show number one, a lot more of their work maybe has a kind of urgent thrust about it. I think things are in transition. I don't think things are in a kind of settled fixed state. I think there are a lot of a real sense of motion, a sense of urgency. As I wrote in the kind of curatorial statement, you know, I think a lot about this time of the pandemic as a time of the work of artists, because often, you know, art from art historians is defined as kind of post-war, as if the war happens and then it ends, and then also the art blooms. And I really thought about, you know, World War II as a kind of parallel moment to this, where, you know, folks were in social isolation, folks were doing a lot of really intense work, and art is such a wonderful thing to do in times like this that are very kind of open and unsettled and new. And so I thought about the work that artists are doing in that time to really kind of change their own thoughts, and I wanted to see that kind of together. Like, and what's really exciting about exhibitions is how a single work in an exhibition really gains new meaning, or how a work in proximity to other works or in relationship to a whole kind of body of work in an exhibition really kind of creates something brand new. It almost sort of parallels the community itself of the Cambridge Art Association. So I wanted each exhibition to have a really sort of strong curatorial premise along those lines. So you can see in the show number one, you know, things are a little bit unruly, there's much more friction, there's things in transition. Often you see motions that seem to move from one piece of art to another. And I really like the hanging and how you can really see that in adjacent works. And even moving into the sculptural works and the hanging works. But I wanted there to be a real sense of connection and connectivity. And I really wanted there to be surprises, because as a viewer, I always want to be challenged by the work. I often find, you know, I look past the sort of subject matter of the work into the sort of felt space or the kind of visceral relationship to the work. So it goes beyond the illustrative into the embodied. And then show number two, I think, maybe, you know, maybe another way to think about show number one and two are, you know, one is much more internal and maybe one's more external. And so show number two, in my mind, was a little bit more delicate, a little bit more looking at the world, maybe having a revaluing or a fresh perspective on the world, or a more delicate perspective, kind of colorful view of things because of kind of how delicately we move outside, and within the pandemic, we're like very, very thoughtful about our actions and our kind of connections and what we're touching and what we're seeing and how close we are to things. And so I wanted that to be sort of expressed in show number 2 as well. So I think both these shows are kind of companions in a lot of ways. I'm excited for folks to see it in person, but I really invite folks to really see, even if it's your own work, how maybe it has a very different communication or different narrative or different relationship when it's in this sort of consortium of other works, which is similar to being an artist in a community of artists like at CAA. So anyway, yeah, that's my 2 cents. And if folks have questions, please ask.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. Even if they're not submitted now, we can open it up again later. Let me see. Something is happening.
Yes, Adrienne mentioned how prolific her practice has become in COVID. So, oh, and the piece is named Visceral, which is great. It's also great for me to see the works in your document, in your video. That was a really interesting video. Just because I didn't, when I'm reviewing it on the computer, it's hard to get a sense of scale. And so it was really wonderful to see kind of scale and texture in the video, and also the kind of movement of a viewer in the space.
Absolutely.
I love what you just said, Ben, because my painting, seeing it here and seeing it with the works that are next to it, it's really a great experience for me. And also, I didn't realize what you said about the movement and the thrust is such a strong thing in my own painting, which is called Emanations. And so I find that very enlightening, what you're saying. And I love the hanging also. It just does express that beautifully. So thank you.
I love the idea of sort of seeing our work in a different perspective, and maybe having an ongoing conversation, because often once the work is made, it kind of has its own life out in the world away from the maker, right? And so it's a little bit different from what is the reasons why the work is made versus what the work does out in the world. Much like a lot of works of art that we find meaningful in our lives, we may not know why it was made, and I think it's great, but we understand what it means to us. And so I think that's it's a very difficult thing for any artist to sort of take that step away, because we're so wedded to the making of the work, but to see it out in the world and kind of living its own life, I think is communicating with other artworks is tremendously exciting. So sure. I have a question. I see a question from Dorothy about more abstract work. No, I don't think, I think, and I don't really create a binary between what's abstract or what's representational. I think it's much more about, issues of how the work communicates. I mean, much like with great calligraphy, you can tell the difference between the sort of urgency or the translation of strength meets precision meets experience meets the sort of moment, like in a calligraphic mark. And you could read that very, very differently. So so I don't want to create the binaries of what's abstract and versus what's not. But I think it's what the work really communicates in a much more kind of urgent or maybe this is a little bit Kantian, but it goes through the sort of indexical illustrative element to it into something else. And maybe music is one form of art that does that really powerfully, is that you're not aware of the form of what you're looking at, but you're sort of absorbing a lot of the sort of context or the sort of felt space, the feeling of being there, much like going to the ballet or going to the classical music concert or going to a Broadway show. It's like this incredible full experience. So I feel like the work, it's so much more than the sum of its parts. And so I don't think, so even though the works that are quote unquote representational, I think they have a quality about them, like the very kind of elusive, powerful quality that seemed to be something I kept seeing a lot, when I'm looking through all the pieces. And so I wanted to build a show from that sensibility. So it's not about like what's best or worst. This isn't the state fair. I think it's much more about putting together a kind of cohesive exhibition that communicates internally. So what makes judging the show, I see Adrienne has a question, judging the show different from others. I mean, it's similar and it's different. I think, one way to think about it is, are we wedded to our region? Is there a regional sensibility that is affects our aesthetic choices? I'm not sure. Certainly we're in the same lived moment, but if we're in Berlin or Beijing or Sao Paulo or the Cambridge area, is there a kind of unifying sensibility? I'm not sure. But, I think what was special about this show is that it's this moment in time. And, clearly I'm familiar with the Cambridge region. I live in Brookline, I work in Cambridge. And so it just seemed the sort of way the works were talking to each other, and therefore maybe the work of artists. And I recommend all of you connect with each other to some degree in some form through CAA and beyond. I think it's really important to see our work in a kind of community setting with that kind of connection, because I don't think we make our work in isolation. I think our work is always in, we're always standing on the shoulders of the giants who came before us, and we're also communicating with each other, right? It's not an accident that, the sort of fashion sense of a certain decade are very aligned. Like people are kind of having that, direct and indirect conversation, or they're absorbing, similar sort of tendencies or zeitgeists that are present. So I think that part is pretty interesting. Like this moment, which is so intense, so heightened, and maybe amplifies the importance of art more than ever. I've been thinking a lot about, what is the relationship between intensification and amplification, right? And then these two sort of gestures where things are sort of coalescing and becoming more urgent and powerful, and maybe intensification is happening on a personal level in our own practices, and then we have an exhibition like this which amplifies this kind of across a number of different people. So that's a roundabout way of answering that question, but I think this moment is so important, and I think we'll all be looking back at this time in the future, and I think just to have this moment in time, this exhibition, to really pinpoint that is really important. I'm getting a question from Margaret. Is the process of building a show subtractive, or do you start with one piece and then add works? Great question. I think it's any kind of organization. If you are collecting 50 of your drawings to organize into a book of 30, for example, and I highly recommend you do that, because it's so easy to make a really beautiful art book online. Like they have such great websites to do that. It's like one of the great benefits of our increased technology, despite the collapse of democracy, is, I think, when you're putting together a book, which is very similar to an exhibition in a lot of ways in terms of sequence and sort of movement, it becomes both. Like you're seeing certain tendencies, and you're seeing certain sort of threads that you want to follow, and certain things fit that really, really well. And, certain artists, they might have submitted 3 pieces, but which piece really fits the kind of thread of this exhibition, or this, the sensibility of this exhibition more. So I would definitely say building a show is both. And for all of you, I'd recommend doing some form of curation. Either in your own practice or just with your circle of artists, just to put your work together on a wall and to see what happens is so great. So yeah, please embody this process yourself. Adrienne, question? Yeah, yes. Thank you. And Christine says something in mind while judging. You know, when you're looking through like hundreds of submissions, you know, you start to and knowing the parameters, right? Knowing that there were 2 different shows to put work in. Um, I just started kind of clustering things together and started seeing how certain works talk to each other. And then that sort of built on itself. And then, you know, and maybe that line was meandering quite a bit because, you know, maybe you want to include this person and their work is maybe 3 degrees different from this other person. So you find other works that sort of fit, you know, fill in the gaps. And, you know, I think for a lot of artists, it's difficult to see your work be used in such a utilitarian way. But I think it's actually really interesting, right? And I think if you analyze the work of curators, which I'm not a curator, but I've definitely done a number of curatorial projects, you start seeing like, you know, elements that really are sort of unifying principles. And I can't stress enough how important it is for artists to see it from that point of view instead of the point of view of the making. Right. So if you think of like a piece of art like this, and there's a kind of invisible scaffolding of like all the things you did to make the work, I think you have to look at how, what the kind of invisible projection is, right? How does it talk to things, and how does it change, and how does it step outside of your experience of being the maker? So anyway, I think this is one of the real great joys of this process.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Ben. We appreciate it. And if you don't mind, we'd love to keep you up on the screen while we announce the awards.
Oh, sure.
I'm just going to spotlight Erin as well. So right now we're going to announce all of the Artist of the Year awards. And then after all the awards are done, then we're going to hear from all of the artists. If this works. There we go.
Hi, Ben. Sorry, my computer decided to die as I was introducing you, but I'm glad that you could join us tonight and talk a little bit about the process. I know that jurying the show is a little bit different, and we don't typically ask our jurors to select 2 separate exhibits, but as many of you know, we have a second gallery space in Harvard Square that has been closed for almost a year now. Maybe someday it'll reopen again. One of our traditions of our Members Prize show that I don't really know when it started, but it's been going on for decades, is that we ask our jurors to select 5 artists of the year. In past times, we have selected the artist based on media category, but at some point in the last 8 years, we decided to invite our jurors to select basically their 5 top artists from the exhibit. And those are the awards that we are presenting right now. I'm clearly not of the TikTok generation, but maybe someday we'll get on board and it'll be one of those things where like I do this and then, you know, a piece of paper appears on someone else's screen, but we didn't do that this time. So our first artist of the year is Cynthia Andrews for her painting Heading East. Congratulations, Cynthia. Is Rebecca going to spotlight you, I think, but here's your award. You can unmute yourself too.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ben, for choosing this work. I'm very honored.
And we'll hear from Cynthia in just a few moments. Our second Artist of the Year award winner is Terri Levine for Anecdote of the Jar. Congratulations, Terri. And we'll hear from Terri as well. Our third Artist of the Year, who is a repeat from 2020, is Susan Murie. Congratulations, Susan, for 2 years in a row.
Thank you, Ben. I'm thrilled to be in this show and just listening to the idea about the juxtaposition of the different pieces together has been really interesting. Thank you.
Congrats, Susan. Our fourth Artist of the Year is Astrid Reischwitz for Inheritance Portrait number 5. Congratulations, Astrid.
Thank you. And thank you, Ben and Erin and Rebecca. I'm very honored to show my work at Cambridge Art Thanks.
Congrats. And our fifth and final Artist of the Year award winner is Claudia Ruiz Gustafson for Tus calles mientras dormías, which is Your Streets While You Slept. Congrats,
Thank
Claudia.
you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Ben. I'm so happy to be part of this tradition. I love Cambridge Arts.
And in addition to an award, our prize winners receive a $100 cash award and also 1 free year of membership at the Cambridge Art Association. And so now we're going to hear from our artists. If you do have questions for them, you can use the hand raise function in the reactions box. Our first speaker will be Cynthia Andrews.
Hello, everyone. I think I'm waiting for Rebecca, were you going to put up the painting? Always lovely to go first with the last name A, right?
Yes, I just need to
Take your time. No problem.
Hopefully that will work when I'm off, but there we go.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. So my painting Heading East is a painting that I made to honor a gallery owner that I worked with out in Western Massachusetts for a long time. It was, you know, a random thing that I have family out there, and I entered one of her shows and just connected with this woman. She was wonderful. And when I paint in oil. And so my paintings are much like frosting a cake, layer upon layer, and a lot of decision making as I go through the process. So in creating this was the final image I had designed for this gallery, and it closed due to COVID. It was struggling a little bit before. Interesting enough, the gallery owner had opened the gallery on my birthday. So it was just kind of this unique relationship. It developed into a friendship. And so this painting never got to be seen by its intended, audience. And I thought about traveling, so I live in Framingham, Massachusetts, out to the western part of the state and back. And what did that journey do for me? All of the alone thinking time in the car driving, 90 minutes back and forth. The differences in the environment, but also the similarities. This gallery was in the heart of East Hampton, which is a revitalized area for lots of art activity and culture activity, and just very, different, right, from working in an urban area like Cambridge or Boston to a more rural area. But I saw a lot of similarities, and I got to know a lot of different artists while I was there. So as I made this painting, I thought, how can I express the journey and what's in front of me and what I moved through and where I can possibly go. So I wanted to show something really vast on a smaller canvas. You can see it's a medium-sized canvas. And I wanted it to be not an exact representation, but a representation of the feelings and the process of taking a chance and having a positive attitude and having hope and faith that where you're going here, I'm heading east, I'm actually heading home for more opportunity. But where the viewer of this piece is going is somewhere that's hopeful and positive, and they feel sort of well surrounded by the environment. So I'll pause there.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Cynthia? I literally can't see any of the participant panel, so raise your hand in the reactions. All right, we'll have Q&A time at the end as well. So I think we're going to move on to our next speaker, which is Terri Levine.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can. It's a little low.
A little quiet, okay. How about now? Is this any better?
Yeah, that's fine. We can also just turn our volume up.
I have a quiet voice anyway, so this Zoom thing can be a little tricky. I just wanted to thank Ben and Rebecca and Aaron for this award. I really feel very honored, particularly as this is the first time I've exhibited in a group show. So it's just been a great experience. This painting, this oil painting, is really about the experience of living through this pandemic. So a lot of what Ben was talking about really resonated with me, and the kinds of things that I was thinking about when creating this piece. So for this painting, I was really thinking about the experience of living in a confined space for an extended period of time, largely in silence. I live alone with my partner, and we don't have children. So we do have quite a bit of quiet time. We have had quite a bit of quiet time in the last year. So I've spent a lot of time working to find joy in sort of smaller, quieter moments and moments of stillness, becoming more observant of my environment, paying more attention to the sort of physical spaces that we are inhabiting in this year, 2 years, down to the way that light changes throughout the day and how it sort of affects the objects around us. I also wanted to communicate, or this is more what I kind of a reflection on the privileges that I have had underscored in the last year in terms of having a home studio practice, but also having a pleasant home environment in a blue state during a lot of political unrest, and then sort of access to healthcare and employment and health insurance and that kind of thing. Easy access to food, lots of toilet paper, yeah. And so in terms of painters that I was thinking about when working on this piece, thinking about Zoe Frank, particularly her Berlin window series, and her both of her colorful interiors and her more monochromatic interiors. I was also thinking about Kathryn Keyhoe, Julie Beck, Wilhelm Hammershoy, Edward Hopper, who can posthumously be called, I guess, the pandemic painter, definitely the painter of this pandemic in terms of depicting people in isolated spaces with lots of negative space and stillness. I was also thinking about Ewan Uglo and Felicia Forte. Formally, and this is obviously quite a representational piece, I was interested in establishing a really clear light effect, so communicating that kind of late slanting afternoon light, using tight value control and selective use of higher chroma areas, and keeping my color shapes really simplified, and kind of trying to keep rendering to a minimum, which is where that kind of abstraction that we were talking about earlier comes in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terri. Beautiful light. Looks like your plants are happy, or at least you painted them to be happy.
They were great.
I've been very happy with all the time and attention that we've been able to give them this year, that's for sure.
There you go. I don't know. I think I over mother my plants sometimes and they aren't happy, but you know, we're all home all the time. If anyone has any questions for Terri, you can just throw them in the chat. We've had multiple comments, Terri, that people thought this was a photograph. So any questions, put them in the chat. We can always address the Q&A after the end of the talks. So we're going to hear from Susan Murie next.
Hello. So this is a cyanotype. It's the medium I work in. It's a photographic medium, and it's made using UV light and with a UV light sensitive solution, if you don't know. And it's a very old form of photography, and something that I do sort of connect with is the sort of lineage of cyanotype makers. There's a lot of between the scientists that started using it when it was invented to artists. There's a lot of us sort of working with botanical images. The original, the person who invented it was an astronomer, and he used it to copy his notes. And I always keep that in mind as this record way of keeping records. And so I think about, what record am I keeping? And I basically, I photograph everything in my work, and I reconstruct my photos to create a new piece. And most of my subjects tend to be from the natural world and sometimes architecture a little bit, and sometimes figures, but I would say primarily I'm just very sort of enchanted with the natural world. I used to be a gardener, so I have a lot of reference point for plants and gardens and the overgrown landscape in particular. And I think that's about it.
Thank you, Susan. You have, because I know you and I follow your work, you've recently started applying like gold leaf or gold elements to your cyanotypes. What inspired that sort of addition?
It's ink, it's gold ink, sometimes watercolor, but the gold ink is nice and vibrant. To be honest, the first time I did it because I wasn't happy with the piece. It didn't feel finished. And so I had some gold ink. I just thought I'd add some marks. And it's a very, and I've continued to do it. And during this time that we've been going through this, a lot of upheaval in our lives, one way or another, and also as a country and everything else, I really needed some time because I pay attention to what's going on. And so it's good to pull away. And I needed some time to just decompress. And I found making the marks is very meditative and calming. And so part of it's just for my own therapy, you know, and I like the way it looks. I like the blue and the gold together. And it just, in some pieces, it's like that finishing touch for me.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it looks, it's on a wall with a yellow piece, so it has a nice sort of golden companion in the gallery.
Yeah, I noticed that. It looks great.
Well, thank you, Susan. Next, we're going to hear from Astrid Reischwitz.
Hi, everybody. So the image is part of a series that I photograph in Germany, in a very small village where I grew up in northern Germany, and the series name is Inheritance. I would like to go back to what Ben said earlier about isolation. And I think this image clearly speaks about isolation, but what I had in mind, because this image was created before COVID, was not the isolation, the physical isolation we experienced during lockdown, but an isolation that happens within us. So it's more about a state of mind. And I started photographing this series that is mainly based on night shots in my village, because I felt at night the village looks different. And it almost became a meditation when I went out during darkness, and everything feels different. And I started to see the surroundings also in a different way. So it was like the image, the night made that the old buildings became awake, and that it breathes remnants of the past. And I felt that the light shines on the old structures, and it reveals a previous lifetime. And the dark hours of the night, they would echo the past and unveil spirits from long ago. I grew up in this village in a time of peace, but also with a sense that the German past of the Nazi period played an important role in my own history, in my family's history, and also through the journey through my life. My parents' generation grew up during the war and rebuilt Germany in the 1950s and 1960s. But their own fate and displacement and unprocessed events are still a world that largely is undiscovered and afflicted with taboos. And I really wanted to put a spotlight on this part. Thank you.
Thank you, Astrid. Again, I think we'll just have Q&A at the end. So we're going to go to our final speaker, Claudia Ruiz Gustafson.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, I want to thank Ben so very much for this award. It means a lot to me. I have said this so many times, but becoming a member of the Cambridge Art Association has been one of the best decisions of my career. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a background before I talk about this specific image. I've been working on my family history for about 6 years now. In 2015, I received a plastic bag full of faded photographs. What happened on that year was that my grandmother, who was the family storyteller, the family story keeper, she passed, she died. And so I started using these photographs, intervening these photographs in order to create photo collages to tell my story, story of my ancestors. And for me, as an immigrant, it was very important for me to reconnect to my roots, to tell the story of my ancestors, and that process, that practice really helped me understand myself as a person and as an artist so much better. So when I was working on those photo collages, I always had in the back of my mind this special person from my childhood that I wanted to honor somehow with my work. But I never really ended up making any composites about her mainly because 2 reasons. One, because I didn't have any image of her, any picture of her. And second, because she was more of a complex, very complex character, very complex memories that I couldn't tell the story in one composite. And so I created a whole body of work, and the image that you're seeing here is one of these series. And the title of this series is Maria. Maria was a maid that lived with us for about 2-3 years in the 80s in my family home in Lima, Peru. And this specific image that you're seeing here, tus calles mientras dormías, your streets while you slept. Here I'm reflecting on a duality, on the double life that that a young Maria, a young person like her had, and because she had to leave her home in order to live with us. And also I'm reflecting here on the sacrifices that she made as a young woman. And this series has 39 images. The last of the series is a reconstruction of that missing photograph of Maria, and it's basically an act of symbolic reparation. I'm creating the missing photograph, and yeah, and that's it. And I would like to say something actually also related to what Ben said at the beginning. In 2019, I had the honor to present a curatorial proposal to Cambridge Arts. And I know that there's a call for curatorial proposals right now. And I'm really encouraging all of you to apply. For me, there was an amazing experience as an artist. It was a sense of community that I felt while we're working on that project. It was priceless. And anyway, I just wanted to encourage all of you to apply. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. And an iteration of the show that you presented here is opening in Fort Point, I think, in March. Is that correct? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, so the curatorial project has become a traveling exhibition, and now we went from Cambridge to Rhode Island, and now back to Boston. So yeah.
Wonderful. And I see that Ben Sloat raised his hand.
Sure. I just figured I'd say a few words about the works, and maybe how they sort of resonate with this moment, which is so urgent in so many different ways. And I think Claudia and Astrid's work, and again, it's less about it being representational, but much more, and maybe the right word is atmospheric, right? And if we remember, we used to go to bars, and we would choose one bar over another bar, even though the menus at most bars is almost identical, is because of atmosphere. Like you feel a certain way being in one space or another. And I think that it really applies to art as well. And I think in Claudia and Astrid's work, there's a sense of this sort of friction between the past and the present. And it's not necessarily about having two images next to each other, but about how the sort of images function, and they kind of build, and they kind of create this very open third space. And you're trying to understand what this relationship is and how they sort of unfold and unpack. And I think this is a lot of the work our country is doing right now. You know, looking at the kind of colonial legacy of different places in the world, or even, you know, what the meaning of these monuments might be. Like if you look at that kind of Robert E. Lee statue in Richmond, Virginia, it's become this kind of amazing, ongoing, performative public sculpture, or like the public sphere has become available for us to communicate and navigate in. And I think that idea of inheritance, the idea of where we come from, you know, what are the kind of systemic forces that shaped who we are now? How do we reflect back on them like a mirror? How do we sort of have this ongoing dialogue? And I felt like those works really had that sort of power within them. And it's not about being international or not. I think it's much more about that kind of level of inquiry, which again is beyond the sort of visual, the visual subject matter. It's like much greater. It's a much wider atmosphere. And then I think Susan's work, to me, sure, there's a really wonderful lineage of the cyanotype, you know, starting with Herschel and Atkins's first ever photo book. But I think, you know, there's something about the fragility of the cyanotype, but also there's also the sense of kind of mourning, right? It was a kind of almost like an offering of some kind, or that kind of delicacy, or the kind of the hand of the artist to arrange this thing, to capture this image, which is so elusive and momentary, but at the same time maybe refers to larger. There's something kind of celebratory, but also celebratory of life and life passing, which is something our country is not doing a lot of in this COVID. It's like remarkable how little mourning there is for all the deaths from COVID. And I feel like that work, even if it doesn't address that directly, I think it had that sort of sensibility about it, that sort of tenderness and longing, or the sense of suspension of time in a kind of other, you know, way. And then the first two works, you know, I thought the painting of the mason jar with the water and the light was really, again, a kind of very close, tender, poetic looking at time passing, and you know, being a caretaker for plants, but also just being in the moment. I think the first two works really established the subject position of the viewer. Like we are there in a place, looking very carefully at certain things. And there are kind of opposites, because I feel like, you know, looking at the glass is very, of Terri's glass is very relaxed, but insightful and thoughtful. And Cynthia's, my read was, you know, is maybe more aligned with like the Van Gogh painting, Church at Rivera, which is one of his last paintings, where you're not sure if you're going to take that journey. You know, I know that there were, you know, the way she talked about it was much more kind of positivistic, but I felt like it was a place of uncertainty, right? Like, am I going to walk forward? The path doesn't seem quite inviting. It seems muddy, almost like a river. You know, the distance seems impossibly far away. There's no trace of human civilization, for better or for worse. At the same time, it was like really kind of seductive, but a little bit, you know, there was a decision to be made, and the viewer is certainly in that position. So I felt like it's very complicated. I think in all the works, these 5 works, there are layers of approach, from the visual to the artistic, to the art historical, to the social, to the kind of, you know, the contemporary. So I think all those together sort of added, but I think all of them were really layered and complicated, and really made me want to look at them a lot. So congratulations.
Yes, congratulations, everybody. I will clap alone. Thank you, Ben, for joining us tonight, and for your insightful words about the process of selecting work for this show. I also want to thank all of our applicants and all of our participating artists, and also all of you who've joined us tonight from as far away as New Zealand, where it is tomorrow. So thank you for being here. We know that this is different. We hope, sometime maybe by the end of 2021 or early 2022, we can actually gather in person again for an event. But we do hope that you can stop by the gallery to see the artwork in person. I think Rebecca has dropped the information to do that in the chat a couple of times. And our online gallery is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you can see both exhibits online right now. You'll have to wait until March to see what the in-person version of part 2 of this exhibit looks like.